Some of you would like to go to a second-hand bookshop in order to buy some books that are indeed old but come very cheap. But some classics do not have any effect on themselves with time. It is what we say that they are unhindered by time. And 1984 is one of those classics. So who wrote 1984? 1984 was written by George Orwell, aka Elic Blair. He was a kind of radical, you would say, such as he was himself a socialist but hated communism. I do not know what socialist and communism have relations and differences between them, but you get the idea when you see Joseph Stalin's regime or Xi Jinping. So, secondly, he was also a critic, a literary critic, but he did not like intellectuals. So you can see he was a pretty um, radicalistic, uh, opinionist person who would have his own ways in his life. So, why did George Orwell wrote 1984? Well, basically, he wanted to show the world how bad communism can be for the future generation of the world. And yeah, he did kind of produce some effect, though it was not that popular, but there were circulations, and yes, it was even read in communist countries such as Yugoslavia, which came under the Soviet Union, and uh, what was that country? Serbia, and that you can see the latter effect can be related to this book. So, what is actually written in 1984? Well, to begin with, there's a person named Winston Smith, and he lives in Victory Mansions. And the in the Victory Mansions, he has an apartment on a very top floor of the building, I would say, because I do not know. And basically, he uses the stairs because the lift does not work or so many works. At that time, the excuse is basically for the preparation of Hate Week. Now, I will tell you what is Hate Week. Hate Week is a procession, a protestation, uh, a general event, a celebrated event. You would guess a celebrated event, but with hate. That's why it's said as Hate Week. And who is the main source of this hate? It is basically, you can say, the Goldstein, I would say his name was. And Goldstein was basically the member, the most important member of the party that rules the country where Victory Mansion is. And that country is basically called Airstrip 1, which belongs to the continent of Oceania. Now, if you have read the book, Winston Smith somewhere has was thinking that Airstrip 1 was called as England before, which might be true because Victory Mansion is actually in London, and London is in Airstrip 1. And you can say then that Airstrip 1 was actually England, and the ethnicity and the classes of people that live in Airstrip 1 can also give us the gesture that it was England before. Now, Winston Smith lives in his apartment, which is which has a telescreen, but more than a telescreen, it is basically a surveillance instrument. How is it a surveillance instrument? It is as Winston thinks. The telescreen is basically controlled by the thought police. And what is the thought police? The thought police is a section of police, a section of police force which basically uh, condemns you as a criminal on the basis of what you are thinking. Yes, not on what you are doing, what you are thinking. If you have any expression on your face while you are facing the telescreen, or any gesture that suggests somewhat kind of antiness towards the party, you would be arrested at night without any information, without any warning, and you basically despair. Now, how does the thought police works? Well, basically, they take you away in the night without any warning, and you evaporate. Now, what I mean by evaporate, your history is destroyed, your presence is destroyed, you are killed. Maybe you are killed, and you simply cease to exist, as I would like to say. Then, Winston Smith, as a precaution, always keeps his bag when he thinks that he cannot control his expressions, or when he wants to avoid the telescreen, just to keep his mood. And sometimes he lowers the voice of the telescreen in order to keep its audio reduced. But it does not give him a something, not a very considerable effect. You can still hear the telescreen even on low audio. And what does this telescreen show us? It is called the telescreen. It must be of some use, except for the thought police. And yes, it basically shows propaganda. There are processions, there's documentary of fake reports that show that the airstrip one is economically and yes, economically progressing, and you know all the fake stuff just to keep the spirits of the people up. And Winston Smith, in order to avoid sometimes the face of telescreen, he sits in a corner of his room where is it's he has a desk, and he also has a personal diary. And just to avoid the face of telescreen, he thinks that if he sits in this corner of room which he has, he would avoid the area that face of telescreen covers in order to observe the people. So, uh, wait a minute, where was I? Yes, Winston Smith has a personal diary. Now, why is it so surprising for a person to have personal diary? Because as the circumstances of the party and the thought police make a personal diary very, very suspicious, because the party is manipulating the people in such a way that they are not likely to have any way of thinking themselves. They are just being made as a robot that only operates when you command it. Now, that's how George Orwell portrays how the situation would be if communism ruled the world. That you would be observed 24 hours, you would have every action of yours, every thought of yours, every gesture of you would be scrutinized, and that you would not have the independence, what do you say, freedom of doing anything you would like, such as not having a personal diary. And also, economically, you are lied, such as I said in the beginning, the lift does not work, and Winston has to use the stairs to go to his apartment. That shows that communism will lead to a disaster of economy, that it is not practically applicable for industrialization, even though it did. And I do not know why did George Orwell wrote this point, portrayed the story as this in his book. There was some kind of success during the regime of rule of Joseph Stalin, but according to George Orwell, the economy of the country would be downgraded. I mean, like, if you yes, he was kind of true. Yes, he was kind of true. You can observe the old tanks, Soviet tanks used in Russia and very downgraded weaponry. That point you can relate to the lift used in the George Orwell, that the lift does not work, even though it is built for the easiness of the people, it just doesn't work. And that's with the weapon system of Russia. And I think economically and yeah, there are a lot of examples in Russia that suggest us that communism did not produce very pleasing effect. So yes, then how the story progresses. Now Winston Smith has a desire to know how the country was like before the party ruled. He is basically, he has lost all of his memory of how the world seemed in the past and how was it before the party ruled. And the party says that the world was like a slummy area and there was no kind of law. Yeah, there is a class of people in 1984 called proles. And what are proles? Proles are basically, you would say, a class of people that will live in slums, the slummy areas. People that live in slums, they are basically called as proles, the lowest class of the society. And the party said that the proles were slaved in the past, the capitalist uh, kept proles as slaves, and yeah, some not so well things were done with them. And the party said that the women's worked in coal mines, the children's there was child labor. But actually, even after the party was ruling, women's were forcibly worked in coal mines. Now here again we see that how George well portrays that how promises the communistic regime would make would come to be false. That the conditions would remain either same, or as some people would have read, that Winston thought that the previous time was much better, previous time before the party was much better than as the party portrays. So here we see that either the communism would make the conditions the same, or they would make it very much worse. Then, as Winston Smith tries to pursue how his past looked like, he has some flashbacks, like he was with his mother and he had a sister, and sometimes he would imagine that his sister and his mother would be in some form of a room, which would be a room in a ship, and the ship was sinking, and both of his sister and his mother were looking at him, and he was at some kind of a threshold on the ground, and he was looking at them. and it was kind of made him kind of feel guilty. How so? It made him feel that his mother, he thought his mother had intentionally sacrificed herself and her daughter in order to save Winston Smith. So he has some kind of grievances, and also he thinks that he was not a good boy during his time with his mother. For example, there was a ration of chocolates during the war, and the chocolates were, distributed. And one day, a chocolate distribution was given to his mother, and he was like starving and very hungry. But his mother told him that his sister was also starving, and she required more than he did because his sister was in a very pretty bad condition. She was like, you know, very much like a skeleton with bulging eyes. So what Winston does, he steals both of the chocolate bars and runs away and eats both of the bars. His mother tries to pursue him, but she fails, and this also causes him to have grievances during his adulthood. Now, if we think about his father, he had a flashback of two old people. One was a grandpa, and that grandpa was crying in a sewer, and that was basically a bunker for protecting yourself from rockets. Now, the grandpa was crying because he had lost his granddaughter. Now, the old man is grieving because he thinks that his daughter would be thinking that his her grandparents didn't took well care of her. So she would be like blaming the old people that they didn't took care of her. So that's why the old man is crying. Now, why do I think Winston Smith might have seen his father alive is because he was with his mother when they were entering the bunker along with his father. So these scenes might be very similar to the World War II. So yes, the part one of the 1984 just ends here. In part two, I would explain the latter events.